Hello friends, it's Mike at Guitar Tricks, back with another YouTube video series, this time on blues turnarounds. In this video, I want to talk about the 12-bar blues form and where that blues turnaround happens in that form. So for this video, I'm going to use the key of A, and the chord set in the key of A that we're going to use are dominant 7th chords. So my 1 chord in the key of A will be A7. I'm going to use a bar chord in the 5th position, so I'm barring down on the 5th fret, adding the 7th fret of the A string, 6th fret of the G string. Okay, in a 12-bar blues form, we stay on that chord for the first 4 bars of that 12-bar blues. So I'm getting into a shuffly strum here to demonstrate how to play some of this. Okay? So 4 bars on that. Our strum is going to be a relaxed down-up strumming, and those upstrokes are going to come a little bit closer to the next downstroke to create a bit of a bounce or a shuffle. Okay? So the first 4 bars are on the 1 chord. The next 2 bars are on the 4 chord. The 4 chord in the key of A would be D7. So I'm going to stay in the 5th position, bar down at the 5th fret from the 5th string all the way up, adding the 7th fret of the D string and B string. Same strum, I'm going to stay on that for 2 bars. And then it's back to the 1 chord for 2 bars. Then we're going to go to the 5 chord for 1 bar and the 4 chord for 1 bar. The 5 chord in the key of A is E7. I'm going to use that same shape as I used for D7, but move it up 2 frets. Strum that for a bar. Then back down to D7 for a bar, so just move it back down 2 frets. And then we're into the last 2 bars of the form, and this is known as the turnaround. Okay, so to very simply just play chords in this section, we could stay on the 1 chord for 1 bar and then move to the 5 chord in the last bar. It would look like this. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, so that's very simple. What if we pushed the move to the 5 chord by a beat? Okay, so I would actually move to that E7 chord on the 2nd beat of the last bar. It would sound like this. Okay, pretty cool. I could push it even further and push it to halfway through that last bar, so I'm coming in on the 3rd beat of the bar. It would look like this. Okay, so all that blues turnaround is doing is setting up where we're going to go back and start again on bar 1 and continue on looping that throughout a song. Okay, so this just gives a colorful little way to do that, create a little bit of tension and set up that move to the beginning of the 12-bar blues form. All right, so we've seen some chord shapes doing that. Now, what about the most common way to do chords on this? There's one little trick to do that makes it sound a lot bluesier and a lot more typical, and it sounds like this. So what I did there is I stayed on the 1 chord for the first beat of the next bar, that last bar of the 12-bar blues form. And then on the 2nd beat, I went up to get the 5 chord, but I went up 1 fret higher. That would make it an F7. And then on the upstroke, I went back down to that 5 chord. So I just moved it down 1 fret and hit it on an upstroke. It adds a little bit of syncopation and really jazzes up that last bar. Typically what you would do is do the downstroke on the F chord, move that chord, do the upstroke on the E7, and then fill it in with an up, down, up right at the end of that bar. So it'd be like this. Okay, pretty cool. What else you could do here is use some slightly different chord shapes. So instead of this version of the dominant 7th bar chord, I can use one that's based off of the C7. Okay, so if you can imagine an open C7, the root of that chord is on the 5th string. So if I move that all the way up to E and kept that same shape, that's a pretty popular dominant 7th chord shape. That's pretty easy to use once you get your fingers around it. So that's the 7th fret of the A string, 6th fret of the D, 7th fret of the G, and 5th fret of the B string. So I could use that chord shape for the final turnaround. Okay? I also can use just the lower 3 notes of that to simplify it a little bit if it's a little bit hard to grab. So I could use my middle finger on the A string 8th fret, index finger on the 7th fret of the D, and the ring finger on the 8th fret of the G. And do a little streamlined version of that chord. Okay, that's pretty cool. And if you want to just extend that chord up a little bit, if your fingers will allow it, if you use your ring finger to just bar down on the same fret and include the top 2 strings, you turn that into a dominant 9th chord, which also works great for the blues. Listen to it in context. Pretty cool. So in the previous video, we talked about how to play chords in those last 2 bars of a 12-bar blues, also known as the turnaround. But today we're going to look at some other options to make it a little more interesting and once again set up a more dramatic transition, getting back to the top of that 12-bar blues form. Okay, so last time, as I said, we used chords. This time we're going to start to incorporate some single note ideas into it with a lot of chromatic type stuff. Okay, so we said last time that we are playing in the key of A. And of course you could play this in any key just by sliding up and down the fretboard and matching these root notes with whatever the root notes are of the key you want to play with. Okay? So I've got my root note here, this A note 5th fret of the low string, and at the top of the turnaround, we can do something like... Okay, so now we're getting into some single notes, some chromaticism, and it sounds a lot more like a traditional type blues idea. Okay, so right on each beat, we're going to switch the notes up. So we're going to start on that root note, which is the A note, 5th fret of the low string. And then it goes to the 4th fret of the A string, 5th fret, 6th fret, and landing on the 7th fret, which is the E note, which of course is the root of the 5 chord, which is the chord we're going to from the 1 chord. So each one could be a down up if you're picking with a shuffle groove, which is a down and then an upstroke that's placed a little bit closer to the next downstroke to give it a bit of that bounce and that shuffle groove. Okay, then the 4th fret of the A, 5th fret, 6th fret, and then the 7th fret, and then you could just stay there. Okay. Another idea is to add in something a little bit different there at the end. So we could do something like this. Okay, so another chromatic little lick there. So when we get to the 7th fret of the A string, I'm just going to do a downstroke, but then on the next upstroke, I want to be back on the 5th fret of the A string, and then go up to the 6th fret for the downstroke, and then the 7th fret for the upstroke. Pretty cool. We can also add some ideas in from our previous video with the chords that change chromatically at the end of the blues turnaround from the previous lesson. So might be something like this. Okay, so using that ascending chromatic idea and then finishing it up with, okay, and you can use any of the chords that we used in the previous lesson. Maybe something like that, or even the bar chord shapes, or the ninth chords. All right, so that's if you're using some lower notes to ascend up chromatically. Another idea is to use some higher notes that descend. So it might look something like this. Okay, so I'm going to bar down at the top of an A7 bar chord, just barring down on the B and E strings, 5th fret. Okay, and I'm going to do the first beat. And then what I'm going to do is add in with my pinky the 8th fret of the B string, but still holding on to the 5th fret of the high string. Okay, and then bring that down chromatically, 8th fret, 7th fret, 6th fret. Okay, another great sound right there. Ending off with just a single note on the E note, 7th fret of the A string. But of course you can add your chromatic chords onto the end of it. Cool. We could also do something where we alternate the picking on this. Okay, a little bit slower. All right, so of course, any of the ideas that you have for those final two chords, ending off that last bar, could be added into these melodic ideas with some chromaticism. We've already covered playing blues turnarounds with chords and with some single note chromatic ideas, but now we're going to up the ante a little bit and start to build off those single note chromatic ideas, but adding harmonies to them, or playing what's known as double stops, 2 notes at the same time. So we might have something like this. Okay, so once again in the key of A, coming back and focusing on those last 2 bars of the 12-bar blues form. And we go back to our 1 chord for a strum. So let's have a look at this. We're going to slide up to the 9th fret of the G, 8th fret of the B string. Come down chromatically from there, okay? And then when we get to the final strum, we're going to bar down at the 5th fret. We're going to strum the top 4 strings and hammer on to the 6th fret of the G string. Okay, this lands us right back onto an A7, the upper part of an A7 bar chord. If you just look at the top 4 notes of that, okay, that's exactly what it is, but you're doing that cool little hammer-on move. Give it a nice bluesy sound. Okay, so one more time, a little bit slower. Okay, and then the way to end off the rest of the bar, all the stuff that we've already covered. Chromatic single note thing or a chord thing. Those are 9th chords. You could use 7th chords. Okay. Sounds really cool, sounds really authentic. There's a couple of things you can do here to mix and match it a little bit. For example, okay, a little more of an arpeggiated approach. Okay, with the G string, B string, G string, and following that through. Right? Nice stuff. Now, what if we looked at the G string and the high string and added in some ideas here? Okay, now we're using what are known as 6th intervals in the key. Starting off again, basing it off that A7 chord shape in the 5th position. But if you look at just the notes on the G and the high string, okay, 6th fret of the G, 5th fret of the high string, and now switch it up to the 7th fret of both strings, go chromatically to the 8th and land on the 9th, okay, ends up with a great sound. Okay, another thing you can do here is strum all that instead of arpeggiated. Something like that with triplet strums, okay? Again, end these off with or. Okay. What about if we take those same shapes and descend down? Okay. That sounds pretty cool. Starting off at the 9th fret of the G and high E string, coming down chromatically to 8 and then the 7th fret, and then landing on an A triad right here, 6th fret of the G, barring down at the 5th fret of the top 2 strings. Or you could end it off with that little lick that we did before. Okay. Now you also want to try these out in all sorts of other keys, and I just want to take 1 minute to show you how to play it in the open position, because these ideas work really well in the key of E blues. Okay, so playing out of an E7 open chord shape. Okay, I'm using those same double stop shapes on the G and B strings, starting at the 4th fret of the G, 3rd fret of the B, coming down chromatically. And then it's just open strings here. You could use the open D, open G, open B, and open high E strings, and just hammer onto the 1st fret of the G string to get the upper part of that E chord. Okay? But in open position, it works cool because you can add in the top open E string. Okay? And end it off with all the other tools in the toolkit that we've already covered, going to that B note to finish off the bar, or using 9th chords. Okay, so we've already covered playing simple blues turnarounds with chords, with chromatic single notes, with thirds and sixths, and let's have a look at going the next step and making something interesting. One of the things I'm going to add in this lesson is using what's known as hybrid picking, which is where you combine playing a single note with the pick and plucking another string's note with one of your free fingers, doing it simultaneously. You can come up with something like this. Okay, so starting off in the key of A, playing my A7 bar chord, 5th position, and coming up and playing this little descending figure. Okay, so I'm starting at the 10th fret of the A and B strings. Okay, this is why hybrid picking works so well, is that these strings are far apart. We've got 2 strings in between here, so it'll be difficult to mute those strings and strum it all. Okay, so it's nice and crisp and clean if you combine the pick with, in this case, I'm using my middle finger to pluck the B string and picking on the A string. So I'm going to plant my finger on the A note, 10th fret of the B string, and leave that there, and come down chromatically on the A string, starting at the 10th fret, going to the 9th, 8th, and landing on the 7th fret of the A string. And then we can finish this off just with using any of the other approaches that we've used in the previous lessons. Use that one, or... Okay, pretty cool. Here's another idea. What if we picked some notes on the low strings that are ascending while simultaneously playing notes on the higher strings that are descending? Might sound something like this. Okay, Okay, so what I'm doing here is starting on the A note, on the 5th fret of the low string and also the 5th fret of the high string. And then I'm going to switch string sets. So now I'm going to go to the A string 4th fret and also grab the 8th fret of the B string. It's a little bit of a stretch. Okay. Then close them together. So now I'm on the 5th fret of the A string and the 7th fret of the B. And then the 6th fret of both. And then the 7th of the A string, 5th fret of the B string. And of course, ending it off however you'd like. Okay, one more time. All right, one last thing to take it to even the next level is to maybe play some triads or some full chords that are moving around to give that same sort of sound, but obviously much thicker and much more complex sounding. Here's an idea right here. Okay, so I'm starting on a first inversion A, the lower notes here, so it's the 4th fret of the A string, and barring down at the 2nd fret of the D and G. Okay? Then I'm going to move to the 5th fret of the D while barring down on the 2nd fret of the G and B string. Okay. Then I'm going to grab the 4th fret of the D, 2nd fret of the G, 3rd fret of the B. All right, this is a first inversion D chord. So far. Next, it's going to be an A diminished chord. Okay, so that's the 7th fret of the D string, 5th fret of the G, 4th fret of the B string. And then landing on an E7, which is the 6th fret of the D, 7th fret of the G, and the 5th fret of the B string. Okay, and then you can end it off like that. So there are some cool ideas to up your turnaround chops a little bit. Fun stuff to play around with. I hope you enjoyed the Blues Turnaround video series. I hope to see you on the next one.